Okay, well, I think that's enough people. You have to excuse me because I used push to talk, so I have to remind myself in between frames. So I'd like to welcome everyone today. Just a quick conversation about Protection Warriors here within Phase 1. As you can read the disclaimer on the bottom, I am unoriginal. I've been playing this game for 20 years. I don't claim to be the expert on warriors. I was actually a paladin main 20 years ago, but I was in a what would be considered today's time a 1% high end guild where we had a couple close to world first clears, but we were within the top 7 to 10, majority of NACs. So I'm just regurgitating information. So with that, we'll get started.
Gig. Yeah, it's a pretty cool sidearm you got there. What is it?
I don't know what it's called. I just know the sound it makes when it takes a man's life.
Okay.
So, Protection Warrior here in TBC. Sword and board, right? Nah, we're slamming. So, when it comes to what we're looking at for rotations, it's pretty much the same. The difference being is that Shield Slam and Devastate. And I'll go into our actual what we're looking at from a talent standpoint, but I'm just going to move through content and we'll do questions at the end. You will also be given a copy of this PowerPoint. That way you can reference in the back. So there's pretty much two builds that everyone looks at, and it comes down to what you're comfortable and also what your gear's at. The more standard build is you're going to be your threat generation, but you're losing that improved demo shout. So you have to look at your composition of your raid team. An important thing is to make sure that someone is doing demo shout in the raid. You have to, just from a mitigation standpoint, it helps the raid so much. If you lose threat, it's just the damage going out. Like I said, we're going to share this when you guys get a copy, so we're not going to spend too much time on it. It goes in depth. The important things we're getting is Devastate and Shield Slam, as well as Anticipation. That Anticipation is going to get you to the crit cap, which will move through that content. Thunderclap. It's not worthless. I know classic we're like it's a waste of mana, not mana, but meaning rage. It's a waste of rage. No. What we're trying to do is survive, right? Not only are we pumping threat, but we're trying to survive, and we do that through our active mitigations. One of those active mitigations is reducing the attack speed. And we do that with Thunderclap. It's going to slow by 10 to 20% improved. I recommend getting improved Thunderclap. That indirectly lowers the amount of damage you're taking. It does generate threat. I know it's not a lot of threat, but when it comes to initial pull, when you have multiple mobs, when you're doing trash, I know there's not a lot of trash when it comes to Gruul and Mag, but it is effective. It slows everything down, and that's one thing about the role with the Protection Warrior, especially if you're main tanking, is whether you like it or not, you're put in a role of leadership. It is informal leadership, but it is a role where you're controlling pace, rhythm, and timing. You're also given the ability to put those marks out, that skull X and following our kill orders. And that's something you should be aware of, as well as have the confidence whether or not to call what to kill next and to recognize what to kill next. Now, it's not a beginner class. Like I said, we're in TBC, we've gone through Classic, but it is to review some things because people forget. Using your Berserker Rage, especially on the mobs that fear, you need to recognize and go through our guide. And that's why I press upon reading the guide when it comes to the raid guides. Our teams put a lot of effort into it. It's the trash. It's the trash that will kill you because we're not aware what it's going to do. So be aware. One, Berserker Rage. You know the mob's fear, pop it. If you don't have a totem down, pop it. You don't have a fear ward. But you also need to recognize you need those things. Like I said, informal leader. You're the one controlling the team. So you need to be able to be vocal. If you don't have a fear ward, ask for a fear ward. If you need a totem, tremor totem, make sure it's going down. But your Berserker Rage, 5 minute cooldown, instant, 30 rage, health lost, and then Blood Rage itself generates 10 rage over 10 seconds. These are good if you are dumping your rage and you need rage to get a shield block up. Because remember, shield block's got a cooldown, and especially if a mob is parry hasting against you and they do two attacks within a 5 second window, you're going to get hit hard. Don't be afraid to use your cooldowns. You need to be aware of how fights pace themselves. One recommendation I make is watch replays. If you ever go to Warcraft logs and you go to Adept Scholar Society or pick other guilds, watch their logs when it comes to the Protection Warriors. Watch their damage, how they're taking damage, and understanding the fights. One thing you can do with that shield wall, it's reduction 70%. Right before Gruul does a ground slam. If raid mana is going low, you need to recognize that. Same with the whirlwind on Mulgar. We don't necessarily have to kite it. We'll get to a point, once your gear is there, you can sit there and eat it. Shield wall it and just eat it, don't move. Same with Last Stand. Don't be afraid to use it, but you also need to know how the fights, when there's spike damage, when right before anything enrages, or Furious Rage for Gruul example, just pop it. Let people know though. That's one thing about being a tank. It's not being yelling, telling people what to do. No, it's being confident, assertive, calm, collective when you're giving messaging. Last stand popped. 8 seconds. 2 seconds. Last stand's down. The people that are listening, that need to listen, will listen to you. And hopefully they're going to mitigate that end damage with more heals. But you have to be vocal and you have to communicate. One thing I did not put in this that I would stress is you look into Nova when it comes to not just the instance timer, because that's nice just recording data, but Nova Raid Companion. Nova Raid Companion tells you your healer's mana. You can put that window anywhere, and that way, especially when you're in the small groups, when you're in your 10 mans, and they're a little more intimate, you can see where your healer's mana is at, and you can utilize that to control the pace. Because if everyone's sitting at 60 to 70% mana, continue pulling. When they're dropping 30 to 40, I would stop. That's just my way. And I do that by watching the mana through the add-on. TBC, cap. Not much changes, right? Still 9%. A lot of math is involved. I'm not a mathematician. Like I say, I regurgitate information. It's hard to get there, yes, I know. We're in phase one. One thing to keep in mind, though, you got your boomkins. I would not necessarily give up a lot of mitigation or effective health pull to try and get to 9%. If I've got the boomkin, we just trust the boomkin's going to fairy fire. And that's something after action reports, when you look at those logs, that's something you want to have a conversation with if you notice that fairy fire is missing. It's one thing leadership will do, but also that's something to bring up. Hey, I ran Carol last night, and you know what? Our boomkin didn't fairy fire once. We have to be team players and we support each other, especially when it comes to the fights. And that's an important thing that we need to rely on. It's the same with Demo Shout and Thunderclap. You thunderclapping helps the entire raid. You demo shouting helps the entire raid. It's vice versa, two-way street. Parry haste. Confusing. I know a lot of people. I think it crunched a lot of people the last 2 weeks because it's just understanding no matter what in our spec, we're picking up that parry, that 5%. Why? Because we need to get to that 102% avoidance. But you need to understand how parry haste works. sometimes, especially in our current standard spec, you'll have a 9 rage devastate. And I tell you what, it's fun to crank out devastates for 9 rage. But sometimes you need to recognize that you're going to get whacked hard, especially dual wielding mobs. Once we start going into other phases, when we have dual wielding bosses, you're going to have to utilize your shield slam, your block, and that slower heroic strike queue up. That way you're not getting parried. I do have a weak aura that's attached to this that will tell you when you're getting parry hasted. And the parry haste is when you attack the mob, it parries your attack, and then it can attack faster for the next attack, up to 20%. This is kind of an important topic, so does anyone have questions? We'll stop here for 1 second about parry haste.
What does effective health mean?
Effective health is just your total health pool.
Like, just I don't know. I had to Google it yesterday because like I'm very close on being crit immune defense wise, and it said like I think I was looking at a couple different guys, and like one of them it said like the EHP wasn't high enough, and so a guy made a different one. Said that's just like my total HP.
Yeah, and it's a good roll into this because Gruul's going to hit you, or Mulgar's going to hit you for about 9k.
Gotcha.
So your effective health pool needs to be up above 9k. And
Yeah.
if you get parry hasted, you're going to take a 9k followed up with a 4 to 5k monk.
I think I'm sitting. No, sorry, one more last statement slash question. I'm sitting at like 11.5 unbuffed, I think. And my defense is like 474. Like, how necessary is it to bump it up to that 480, 485 to tank heroics?
For heroics, I mean, it's important because no matter what, it's going to be the active mitigation and it's going to be a relief for your healer.
Gotcha.
One thing I know, it's a fun balance. The thing is, we're not reinventing the wheel. This template's been set in stone for the last 20 years. It's just now there's
Yep.
more data and more information to be able to create sets. I would definitely look into, especially the enchants.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily would recommend if you have gem slots. I would recommend keeping stamina gems and meeting your meta. If you have the Meridian helmet,
Yeah.
that
Yeah, I
way
do.
you get that meta. But outside of that, unfortunately, sometimes you have to look at that 12 defense over 15 stam for
Yep.
bracer or chest.
Gotcha.
I know it's hard, and that's the thing. It's supposed to be hard, so don't get frustrated. It's supposed to be set up where it's supposed to be hard in the beginning. You're not
Yeah.
supposed to walk into it with 9% hit and 14,000 hit points unbuffed.
Yeah.
It's
Gotcha.
supposed to be,
I'm like I'm a shield away from hitting that defense, that total defense, and like I've just been through so many runs. I just like want to get into a heroic and just seeing, if it'd be all right to do it without it. But I'll keep hitting slabs and Botanica.
yep. Unfortunately,
Awesome.
I mean, when it comes to the algorithm and how the set paths are, it's pretty much that's how it's set in stone. Is you have to get the specific gear before you can go to the next tier.
Gotcha.
Crushing.
Thank you.
It's a good roll into it. Crushing blows, they suck. That's why we have to work so hard to get that 490 defense. Some math says 493. So in TBC, if you're not aware, the crushing blow mechanic, it's 150% damage on a physical hit. And it's all raid bosses except for a few of the caster ones. So to defeat that, you need to have 102.4% total avoidance. That includes your miss, your dodge, your parry, your block. That pushes crushing blows off the table with shield block up. That's the important part. Now, it is not physically, it's not mathematically possible to have shield block up 100% of the time. And that's where we look at parry haste, because a parry hasted Gruul could eat both your shield blocks in 2.5 seconds. Shield block is a 5-second cooldown. So this is where it gets fun. This is why prot tanking is so much fun. But you have to, unfortunately, you have to get trained to hit shield block. My shield block is the letter E on my keyboard. So my finger is always on it. And every time it's down, it gets hit instantly. And still, I'm bad at it. You can look at my logs. I'm usually 65%, less than 80% when it comes to my shield block uptime. You have to get used to it to just hit it every time. Also, going back to our guides, review the guides and understand which bosses will crush. And like I said, it's just about every one of them in Karazhan. Mulgar, Gruul, they all crush. This is why it's so important to keep up that thunderclap, that demo shout, to mitigate that, because there can be that short window, or pebcac, person sitting at the keyboard doesn't hit the E key, and you know what? You get crushed, you die, and you know what? The whole raid wipes. It sucks. Uh, this was Gino, one of our warriors from Classic, and I stole this because, yeah, it's one person he knew how to consume. It's a fun little caveat of the game. It changes things, sometimes minor, sometimes greater. And it's there for you to use. And I think it's fun. I have no problem playing the game to make gold just to buy consumes so I can use them on a raid night. But when we're looking at consumes going into TBC, it's a lot easier because the way they changed it between the two. You got your offensive and your defensive, right? Your guardians and your battles. It'd be nice to get to a point where we're just using Gift of Arthas, because that benefits the entire raid. So if you're not aware, has a 30% chance to afflict the attacker with a disease that increases the damage they take for 8% for 3 minutes. 8%. Outside of that, like I said, when we give you a copy, feel free. You can adjust what you like, what you can afford. Um, but the references, the material, the websites I use, it lays it out pretty well when it comes to your consumes. I will always try to use a Gift of Arthas, if not Major Agility. When it comes to the Karazhans, because my character is an alchemist, I like to go ahead and blow through the Mad Alchemist potions, because they pull up both a Guardian and a Battle Elixir randomly. And I think it's fun. It's a little fun thing, part of the game. Now, like I said, we'll give you a copy. I use a lot of macros, like a lot. Like, I have no free macro. I think I have 2 or 3 free macro spots on hits, in hits specific, not counting the one that's shared across all accounts. Why? It comes back down to playing the game and being able to react. As a main tank, or just as a protection warrior, you reacting saves lives. It's so the healers don't lay on the ground. It's so the DPS get an extra second. So that's why I run so many macros. And you notice the majority of the macros all start with start attack. This is so you're not clicking on mobs. You hit the macro, your character's already queued to attack it, and it queues the ability. One thing I do stress is definitely the defensive stance, battle stance taunt. This is going to swap you from, if you're charging, into a taunt, which gives you that nice timing. Just more macros. Charge macro is a nice one. The intervene macro, especially if you have a focus target, especially in the intimate, smaller groups, the 10 mans. If you have one of your healers as your focus target, so you can intervene on them, or if you have it on your warlock, because you know they're going to pull aggro, that way you can intervene on them. Healing pots, health stone. Oh crap, macros. Sunders. It's a little different. I just added this to keep it in there. Devastate, especially if you're main tanking, you're always going to be devastating. Even after the 5 Sunders, Devastate still aggroes or generates threat. It's just a simple tracker. That way you can see, especially if you have multiple tanks or multiple tankings of mobs. That way you can just tab around. You can see. DEF CON, I just threw this in there because it's a lot of information. I don't necessarily use it. It's nice for the swing timer. Um, it just covers everything, and it's a lot to cover that I have on the screen. But I wanted to include it just because to make people aware there's weak ores like this out there or add-ons that will show you all the information. And with that, any questions? Well, good deal. I can send it over to Ebo and finish my quesadilla.
All right, nice. Well, appreciate the presentation, Hits. It was very good. I'm just going to pull up my screen here, and then we can talk about the damage side of things. All right, as I'm pulling this up, I think I posted a poll in the Warrior channel just to kind of get a sense of what everyone's specs are. Just to give me a sense, and Hits as well, just who's prot, who's damage, who's what spec, just so we can kind of help guide if necessary. But so if you got a free moment, just go in there and complete that poll. But I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen, and you guys can hop on in. All right. So as you guys are hopping, I'll just go ahead and get rolling here a little bit. So where we left off in Classic, this is kind of what our damage meters look like. This isn't specifically our guild, but in general, DPS warriors were kind of, god tier level damage. Raids were rolling, basically a third of their damage would be warriors, and they'd all be stacked at the top. That's not quite the case now in TBC, but as we move forward, there was some concern, especially at the beginning of the last iteration of TBC, that warriors just really fell off and are just really bad, essentially. I actually asked AI this question earlier today, and it said that warrior DPS, it's not bad, as kind of has previously been described. It's really just more balanced and kind of more comparable to other classes instead of being just absolutely insane like it was last expansion. But if anything, I think it kind of makes it more interesting instead of just mashing 3 buttons and being, godly. It kind of puts more into your skill and your preparation into performing well. So we do have some data from the first 2 weeks of this iteration of TBC. This is what it's kind of looked like. So for Karazhan, you can still see warriors are still doing reasonably well. Obviously, the Furies are a little bit higher than the Arms warriors. We'll get into that in a second, but definitely not by any means, I would say, bad DPS. Same thing, Groll, Magtherin, and you can see that warriors are still performing reasonably well. And if anything, it actually looks better moving into later phases. So looking at last iteration, you can see, with phase 2, still, respectably doing well. And then it actually kind of scales up to higher to where warriors even get, significantly better as, armor penetration, things like that become a thing. So definitely, a lot to look forward to as a damage warrior. Kind of a slower start in the beginning of this expansion, but definitely ramps up later on. So kind of getting into more the specialization overview. So your 2 choices, Fury and Arms, Fury being the spec that we all were in Classic. In TBC, it still performs on a single player basis better than Arms. There's kind of the simulations that I ran. It's about a 200 damage DPS increase. However, with Fury, you're not providing a raid buff, and that's extremely important. So with Arms, even though you're doing a little bit less damage, you have Blood Frenzy, which is a talent, and that provides 4% increased physical damage to all physical damage dealers throughout the raid. Within our specific raid composition, we are only bringing one DPS warrior. So therefore, we're going to take the arms warrior who's providing a raid buff to everyone. That's a much higher net, raid DPS gain than having the minimal DPS increase that a fury warrior brings by himself. So therefore, if you are playing or planning on playing or raiding as a damage warrior, you are going to be arms whether you like it or not. Now, fortunately, with arms, there's two different play styles, and as far as I'm concerned, and I think leadership in general, it's really up to you what you prefer. You don't have to pick one or another. I'm just going to give you kind of the breakdown of the two, and you can kind of choose for yourself. The two play styles are dual wield arms. It's also called kebab. I've gotten many questions. Why is it called kebab? It's actually pretty stupid, but it's dual wield arms, and then you can see the breakdown eventually how it lands to kebab. Kind of silly. The alternative is two-hand slam. That's kind of the more meta composition. That was kind of the original arms build. Kebab was kind of something that was created more recently in this last iteration. It's kind of originally started as like a meme spec, but grew throughout the expansion and kind of proved itself to be, competitive with two-hand slam. So kind of the difference between those two play styles. The damage, kebab, especially in this earlier phase, tends to perform a little bit, less on the damage side than a two-hand slam. But I'm going to get into kind of the nuances between that. So on a single target encounter, I ran a simulation on top right. Does, still very respectable, a little bit less than two-hand slam. That margin kind of widens as you get into more a cleave or AoE fight, just because that two-hand weapon, higher DPS with sweeping strikes going, you're just going to hit so many more mobs so much harder. So you get just more damage output. However, on a fight that requires a lot of movement, maybe something like a Magtheridon where you're, having Quake and things like that, it's harder to actually pull off your slam rotation perfectly. So then maybe, it kind of evens out into kebab versus two-hand slam. With speedrun guilds, this gap virtually disappears. I kind of was looking at all the top parses earlier, and it seemed like half the top arms warriors were kebab and half were slam. Just with, kill times that the kind of slow ramp up that slam is kind of disappears when you're killing things in 30 seconds. So, but as far as playstyle kebab, you're using two one-handed weapons. It's pretty easy to play from a rotational standpoint. It plays very similar to Fury. So a lot of people like that. Essentially, all you're doing is swapping Bloodthirst, Mortal Strike, and that's it. Now, two-hand slam, you're using a big two-handed weapon. It's a pretty high skill ceiling, I would say. It requires definitely some practice. It is very different than kebab and how Fury was in Classic. It's a more dynamic rotation. You have to be looking at a lot of different things. You're tracking your swing timer very closely. There's just more to it. So yeah, my recommendation, I would say kind of what I wrote in red. I agree with that. I think, you play kebab if you don't really care so much about eking out every little bit of damage. You kind of just want to chill, play an easier rotation. Go for two-handed slam if you want to challenge yourself, if you care about performance. But really, honestly, I think you almost in a way need to just play both, because even if, maybe you're say, oh, I want to challenge myself with slam, you may play it and just hate the play style. So I say just try them both out and see what you like. As far as talents, I'm not going to go through everything here. The main thing, obviously, you're not speccing into improved slam. You are picking up sword specialization, so that is going to have some effect onto what weapons you may or may not choose. We'll get into that in a little bit. Obviously, you're picking up Blood Frenzy, standard arms talent. Kind of piggybacking off of what Hit said, there are definitely small differences in what you can pick and choose in both of these talent trees. Some people will pick Unbridled Wrath, which is in the Fury tree, that second row. I would highly recommend any damage warrior just pick up Demoralizing Shout. It's going to help the raid. Don't put that onto the Protection warrior who's got a lot of other things going through their mind. That way, if you notice Demo Shout falling off while they're scrambling or focusing on other things, you can just throw it up and help them out in a pinch. So the rotation, busy slide here, essentially can distill it down to you're going to keep Whirlwind and Mortal Strike on cooldown, always. Whirlwind actually takes priority over Mortal Strike with this rotation, so just keep those buttons on cooldown. Obviously, you're going to use Death Wish, maybe during like a Bloodlust or Execute phase. and then you're dumping Heroic Strike just to dump Rage. And that's pretty much it. There's not a whole lot different than your typical Fury rotation. For cleave fights, you're popping Sweeping Strikes and just hitting again Whirlwind and Cleave. And that's basically it. It's a pretty easy play style. You can watch videos of other people doing it, but overall it's not too complicated. So two-hand slam, similar talent tree. Obviously, the main difference is you're picking up improved slam here, just so you can cast very quick slams. I'm gonna go through the rotation here. This is my first time playing slam. I didn't play the last iteration of TBC. So in looking this up on my own, doing my own research, it was kind of confusing because just reading this, off of Wowhead, you're just thinking, okay, I'm just keeping Mortal Strike on cooldown and Whirlwind, kind of like Kebab, but it actually is much more nuanced than that. What I would say is, yes, Mortal Strike is like your biggest damage ability, as is Whirlwind. It's probably your very close second. But you also want to be making sure you're getting in as many slams as possible and as many attacks. Execute is a little bit, I wouldn't just spam execute during execute phase, because on a kind of per rage capita, if you will, it's actually pretty inefficient from a damage standpoint. There are some exceptions, which I'll get into. The main time I would really only use execute is if your Mortal Strike and Whirlwind are on cooldown and you actually don't have, or you have less than 25 rage after a slam, meaning you can't do a Mortal Strike or Whirlwind, you're just kind of waiting for an attack. You might as well use an execute rather than just not casting anything. If you're sitting at 100 rage, don't use execute. Yeah, you're going to see a big number, but you would actually get more out of that rage that you spent applying it elsewhere. And for AoE cleave fights, it's kind of similar to Kebab. You're popping Sweeping Strikes, Whirlwinding, and Mortal Striking. You can throw in some slams, but really you just want to be honestly cleaving and keeping a Whirlwind on cooldown. So this is a very kind of basic slam rotation. I do want to spend some time with this just because for those of you who are choosing to do slam, I think it's important just to understand the basics before you start adding more and more nuance, because it can actually get pretty complicated. You don't need to read all this. This is just more for your review. I'm going to just kind of walk through it and have some diagrams and make this a little bit easier to digest. But essentially, you can think of it as a triple attack. So let's say you have a 3.6 second weapon. Okay, so every 3.6 seconds, you're casting an auto attack. Throughout that 3.6 seconds, you should really usually always be pulling off 3 attacks. So one is your auto attack that casts right at 0 seconds. You should be slamming typically right after that. And then you have enough time to either do a Mortal Strike, a Whirlwind, or some other move. And we'll get into what those others are. A Battle Shout, maybe a Hamstring, maybe an Execute. And that's, typically you're doing that rotation over and over and over again. So I'll get into kind of what that looks like here. So using Lionheart Champion, the 3.6 second weapon, how this works. So that bar, that horizontal bar, is basically your swing timer, essentially. So every 3.6 seconds, you're casting an auto attack. So putting this all together, what this looks like, at 0 seconds, you cast, an auto attack. That's just done for you. Then right after that auto attack, ideally you cast a slam, within maybe 0.3 seconds of that auto attack going off. That slam takes 0.5 seconds. It'll cast, and then it resets your swing timer. So that's why you want to try to cast it right after your auto attack, just so you're not delaying your next auto attack too much. However, if you cast your slam too early, you're basically clipping and losing an entire auto attack, which is a very big damage loss. So you really want to, if you're going to have to choose to be late or early, it's better to be late. But you don't want to be obviously too late, because you can actually crowd out that third move in your triple attack. So kind of focusing back. So you auto attack, you slam, your swing timer gets reset, but remember you have a global cooldown of 1.5 seconds. So that's kind of what that bar is showing. Then you have a window as soon as your global is off cooldown, to where you're going to do either your Mortal Strike, your Whirlwind, or your other move. The priority typically goes Mortal Strike. You do that first, then your Whirlwind on your next auto attack band. And then you're going to either do like on your third attack, you're going to go back to Mortal Strike because it's off cooldown, and then maybe a Shout after that. So you're doing those moves in between that, kind of in between that 1.5 and 2.1 seconds on your timer. And then that's going to trigger another global cooldown before basically your next auto attack starts, and this whole kind of repetition restarts. So I know it's kind of a lot. If this is the first time you're really seeing this or looking into this, it kind of seems a little bit complicated. So just, you'll have these slides. You can kind of sit down and look at it. I did try to make a video. I'm not very good with technology, I will admit, but we'll see if it works. So I tried to, I don't know if you guys can see this.
Yep.
Sweet. All right, so I had to slow it down here. So I'll orient you guys real quick. So in the middle of that gray bar, that's my swing timer. That's basically what I'm staring at. And I'll try to slow it down so enough so you can kind of read the text. But essentially, that bar is going to move towards the right, and that will be the end of my swing, and that's going to start, my auto attack. So that's going to start my auto attack. So this is, a cycle happening. My auto attack happened. I immediately slammed right after that. Now things are on a global cooldown. We've come off global cooldown. Now I'm going to press my Mortal Strike. That's another global cooldown. And I have a little extra time. I don't have enough time to cast another ability, so I'm just going to let my swing timer reset. Going to do another slam. There's the global cooldown. Now I'm going to whirlwind. Another global cooldown. Swing timer ends. Going to get another auto attack. Slam. Now technically I could have Mortal Strike here because it's off cooldown. I didn't have rage, but you could also throw a shout here since whirlwind's on cooldown. It's a good time to do that. You can either shout, battle shout, demo shout, maybe a sunder. You can hamstring to try to get a sword proc, or maybe even an execute here. And then basically the whole thing just restarts. And that's just the constant rotation that you're doing as a slam warrior. Really crazy slide here. I just put some weak auras that I thought are really helpful. I can kind of go through what these are. The time to kill, that's over kind of on the enemy nameplate, top right where it says 0000. Normally when you're doing an actual raid encounter, it tells you how much time until that boss is dead. That way you can kind of be strategic about when you want to pop cooldowns, things like that for execute phase. Or just knowing how much time maybe you can get like a double trinket in, if there's 4+ minutes left. Obviously my swing timer in the bottom, I like that particular swing timer because it has a latency thing. So technically, if you have really bad latency, you can technically pre-cast before the end of the bar and get a slam off without clipping an auto attack. But that's kind of risky gameplay, but it's there if you want it. The auto slam delay, which is the number right next to the end of the swing timer, it actually just tells you how much you delayed your next auto. So it kind of gives you some real-time feedback on how good you are with your slam right after that auto attack. But you don't have to have that. I just kind of like it. The bicarb warrior UI, that just gives you information about what your cooldowns are. It kind of tracks, your Mortal Strike, whirlwind, potions, things like that. Some other things I'd recommend as far as weak auras, Wind Fury tracker, just to make sure you're in range of your Wind Fury. Because that's a huge DPS loss if you're out of range. So just something to be mindful of. And then that consumable reminder, that's just more for tracking, making sure you're not missing a consumable or doing something stupid, but not something you absolutely have to have. As far as stat priorities, I know Hit's kind of mentioned some of these things. So hit rating 9%, that actually drops down to 8 with the Draene buff. So you technically only need 8%, but getting closer to 9 is nice just in case maybe your shaman dies in your group, things like that. Expertise, 6.5% is what we're shooting for, just because that then prevents all dodges from the boss. You're still going to get parries because you would need 14% expertise, which is just really not obtainable. Even the 6.5 I don't think is obtainable in this phase, but just kind of a cap that you're eventually looking for. As far as crit strike rating, there's no hard number. I would say generally around 30% for Arms Warriors, especially the two-hand slams, because it's kind of a feast or famine with that big two-hander as far as rage generation. So the more crit that you have, you'll get a lot of rage, and you really need a lot of rage to be constantly doing your triple attack to get the most damage. So I know in Classic it was almost, you get a certain amount of crit and then you just want to stack strength, but I think crit strike rating is actually more important for Arms here. I put all the conversions. It gets a little confusing, so I just put that there for you guys to look at. Just so you know. Some weapons and things that you guys can obtain pretty easily outside of raid. I just listed some things here. Because looking at BIS list, there's a lot of raid type things and a lot of things that are dependent on RNG, but these are all typically all things that you can just pick up, either just spamming a dungeon or doing a quest or farming some badges. So pretty easy stuff for you to get things that have a lot of good value. As far as weapons, so for two-hand slam, again, you want sword because you're going sword specialization. These are the best swords in the game, but you'll notice that the best ones are really made from blacksmithing. So if you're thinking two-hand slam, I would highly recommend you go blacksmithing. I know it's a lot of gold investment, but you'll get a lot of value because you can constantly upgrade these swords all the way, I think, through phase 3. There's a couple other options, but they're not great. The one in Karazhan, good luck getting that. It's very low chance of that actually dropping, or you can farm Heroic Underbog, but still not a great option. As far as Kebab, I know I said, farming swords, obviously for sword specialization. If you're going blacksmithing, you're going to go Kebab. You could actually make a Dragon Maw. I know it's a mace, but the weapon is just so strong that it actually overcomes, having that sword specialization just because of how good it is, how good that proc is. That haste rating is extremely valuable, and just the fact that it hits hard. The 2.7, speed with a 91 DPS is no joke. Now in your offhand, you could do Vindicator's Brand, another slow sword. There's some people, I wouldn't say I'm like an expert in Kebab, but I know there's some people who will say that you want an offhand that is fast just to generate rage, and also you're kind of fishing more frequently for sword procs. So Elatras is another good option if you don't feel like, farming Exalted for Aldor. Another good option there. Gems and enchants, I'll leave this here. The main things I'll touch on, for your glyph, you just need to get Revered with Scenario and Expedition, for your head enchant. And then your shoulder enchants obviously is Aldor and Scryer Exalted. On the right, it's just basically all the different gems that you'll cycle through based on kind of the stats that you need. Hits mentioned this, so consumables is a lot easier in TBC. So basically what we're looking at, you're either doing a Flask of Relentless Assault, because that counts as both a Battle and Guardian Elixir. If you don't feel like spending the gold on that, then you can just get individual Battle and Guardian Elixir instead of a Flask. The best Battle Elixirs are actually Demon Slaying, which actually even outperforms a Flask if you're fighting a demon. If you're not, then as far as a Battle Elixir, you're looking at, either if you want Strength, you just go Elixir Major Strength. If you want Crit, then you can either go Major Agility or Mongoose. They're very similar. Mongoose is like less than 0.1% more crit, but I would just go with whatever's cheaper. And then you can get a Guardian Elixir with that. Spirit of Zanza from Classic is actually still the best for a DPS warrior. And it's maybe worth investing in because dead DPS does no DPS. And as far as other consumables, so food buff, you're just going to get a plus 20 strength. It's pretty easy. Either roasted clef hoof or smoked desert dumplings from Classic. Haste potions are your best potions. They far outperform Mighty Rage. And then you're going to use scrolls as well. And that's pretty much it. There are some other consumables. You could do flame caps if you're the really sweaty type just to get a tiny bit of more fire damage, but they're so expensive. It's really, honestly, I wouldn't even recommend it. And if you're going Kebab, you can enchant your offhand weapon. Remember, you're not going to enchant your main hand weapon because that is what's going to be applied with Wind Fury, which is your biggest DPS gain. Engineers also have a little bit more damage options with some engineering consumables they can use as well. So macros, Hits touched on this as well. I personally am not a big macro person. I just rely more heavily on keybinds, but there are some macros that I think are just non-negotiable. The start attack macro, you got to do it just for all your offensive abilities, just so you're not right-clicking or realizing you're not attacking something. And then if you're slamming, it's good to have a stop cast on your slam in case you realize you slam far too early. You can just press it again and it'll stop your slam without resetting your entire swing timer. So nice one to have there. included this just really, if you're DPS warrior and you're tracking how to parse, if that's something you care about, my recommendations, just using consumables, having weak auras just to give you real-time information. So things like, are you in range of your Wind Fury totem? Is your battle shout up? Does the boss have 5 sunders? These are all things that drastically affect your DPS. And just using other resources to kind of come up with a game plan prior to raid. So that would be things like WoW Sims, the Fight Club Discord, YouTube videos of people who have played Arms Warriors for years and have some pretty solid advice, and even just looking at the Scholar Society raid guide, just so you know mechanics ahead of time and kind of can plan when you want to pop cooldowns or what you want to look out for. And then finally, Warcraft logs, I think, is probably the most valuable. Just all your raid data is in there. You can plan, how long is this boss fight? How many times can I pop a trinket, or when can I optimally use my cooldowns? And also you can get feedback on how other really good warriors are managing to get as much damage as they're doing. So all that information's there. You just got to use it. So I posted links to all those different resources. I would say, if you're looking at a place to start, if you're new to DPS warrior or arms warrior, I would say these YouTube channels are really great. Individually for Kebab and Slam, there's tons of videos that these two creators have made, and goes really into depth. And that's all I got. So if any of you guys have any questions, I'm happy to answer what I can.
Just absorbing it all, no questions.
When can I cast Wreck?
So was that, when do you cast Wreck?
Yep.
Heroism, probably.
Yeah, I mean, as soon as Bloodlust Heroism comes up, that's usually 99% of the time going to be when you do it.
Actually, I've been 90% tanking, but I'm always scared to press that Wreck button because it just feels like the boss will be attacking me after that.
So yeah, definitely something you got to consider, just looking at your threat meter, because especially if you're two-hand slamming and you are critting on every move, you are going to jump in threat very quickly. So just something to keep in mind. It's nice
I
though.
would save that after heroism. That'd be your own little 2% left on the boss. Everybody's dying. Get it dead. But
nice
I do have a very important question.
Sure.
When talking about the Slam spec, you didn't play Space Jam theme song at all. I want to know the reasoning behind that.
No, that's a fair question. It's a very good question, and I don't have a good answer for you, unfortunately.
It's okay. None of us are perfect.
There was a good jump off though for the main tanks, or if you are tanking, it's not your fault if someone pulls threat. We've been doing this a while. We've been raiding together as teams for a while. Everyone in the guild should have a threat meter. They should know when they're over 115%, and they should know when to back off. But I don't want you ever to think it's your fault, you stink, you suck, because you're not being able, because they're over threading. There are just certain fights that the mechanic.
Let the warlock or the shaman die.
I mean, I have an intervene macro, and I will focus target the warlock. But
yeah, I
when
need
it comes
to.
down to it, we just need
I
to
need to
make
get
sure
that
everyone's on
intervene
the same
macro.
page.
I'm not quite sure how to use intervene yet. I've just been using intercept instead still because I don't understand how to use it right. I got to intercept and quickly hop back to defensive stance and pop a taunt if I have to. Or
I have noticed that intervene helps a lot with the thing that Hits brought up a couple weeks back with where you're facing is who you target. That selection or whatever, that's helped me in a couple of heroics to jump back to a DPS and be able to get there quickly and taunt off.
gotcha.
one thing I stress, especially like I said, as a warrior, you're always going to be an informal leader. If you have the time, take the time. Read the guides, understand the trash, know when you need your buffs, know when to call for a fear ward, know when to drop totems, know when to call for heroism. Especially, like I said, in the small, more intimate groups, the 10 mans, just be aware. It's always about being situational awareness when it comes to being a warrior.
I have one more question. Did I see earlier that I think I saw maybe on Ebo's part of the PowerPoint that y'all are only doing one DPS warrior per raid?
Yeah, as far as DPS warriors, yep, we're only slotted for one currently.
Gotcha. I didn't. I have a 2-month-old, and so I couldn't like main raid for TBC, and so that's why I'm not playing rogue anymore because I saw we only had one rogue spot, and so I was like, I'll make a warrior. I mean, I would have a tank spot too, possibly, which would likely be rare because it seems like we always have the tanks, But dang, I didn't know there was only one DPS warrior spot. I missed that.
Yeah, unless the higher ups have a plan to change that, maybe add a Fury Warrior. But for now, yeah, with just the one spot, it's kind of limited to just arms for now.
Gotcha.
I think if you're going to be benching, I think you'll be okay, just because you can replace any of the melee DPS. If they need a melee DPS, there's still a
Yeah.
chance you could get in there.
Gotcha. No, where did y'all say y'all be posting these like slideshows and stuff at?
I can post my file to the warrior channel.
Okie doke.
I have to give the
Thank y'all.
disclaimer that was my own DVD when I copied, so for the video.
Getting fancy on it.
Well, we're almost at time, and if no one's got any other questions. Always reminder, use the tank channel, use the warrior channel. I try to stay active, and if I don't know the answer, I'm always going to go look for it, just because that's the way my brain works. It likes to solve problems. Everyone have a good night then.
Thank you, guys.